So our topic today is, sorry about that. Our topic today is the topic of liability. And I was surprised as we put this webinar out, the announcement, how many people signed up. We had a huge number that signed up for the training, and I thought, wow, I thought they'd gotten tired of hearing us talk about this. And I got thinking about, you know, why are people worked up and worried about liability? And I think there are a few reasons. One is it's a nightmare. You know, being involved in a lawsuit, particularly where somebody's been injured or there's been property damage, it's a tough deal. Another thing is uncertainty. People don't like something out there that is waiting to cause them problems. They want to know how to prepare and plan for that. How am I going to stay out of trouble? And so we decided to do this webinar and just focus on here are some simple principles of liability. Here are the ways that you can protect yourself and hopefully prevent those losses. We can't prevent lawsuits. Just because you're right doesn't mean you're not going to get sued. Just because you're right doesn't mean you're always going to win. That's the reason why you have insurance. That's the reason why you partner with the trust to help you with loss prevention and to make sure that we have that backing in the event that you do have a problem. However, we can reduce the liability and potential that we have a loss come from one of those lawsuits. We can really reduce the amount of lawsuits that we ever have. Now, there are going to be crazy people out there that are going to file suit just because they want to ruin your day. But in general, we can do some of these things to protect us. So let's go through and just talk about a couple of things. But of course, I'm going to throw out some disclaimers to start with. Well, number one, I'm not an attorney. I work as a risk manager, and so I'm taking it from this standpoint. So don't take this as legal advice. Always refer back to your attorney for your organization. Make sure they know what they're talking about before, you know, making sure it's something that they're versed in, and use good attorneys. But I want to talk about some general terms, and as we talk about this, these are general terms, and realize that in every claim or every different situation, there are differing circumstances, and so the things that I say here may not be absolutes in all cases. Sometimes we settle a claim that potentially we may win, and sometimes that's a frustration to people. And say, why are you going to settle that? And there are reasons for that, and we do that for risk management. Now, there are times when we will defend a claim all the way to the Supreme Court. We'll defend a claim to the hilt because it's on principle. There are some times that we will settle a claim because that's the best thing for the trust membership to minimize the losses that are there. Let's go ahead and, as we go through here, just realize that I'm speaking in general terms, and the specifics of your particular claims or situations that you have out there are each independent, and we want to talk with the adjusters, with the claims manager here, and make sure that we're up to date on that. Now, you guys probably have seen this if you've been around my training for a while, but I coined something myself, and so you know, I have to use it. You know, a mind like mine can only come up with so many new things. But I'll ask you the question. You guys remember this movie here? Finish this phrase: if you build it, and the rest of that is they will sue. Just by owning a piece of property, just by doing whatever your operations do, the goods or services that they provide, you incur liability on yourself. There's exposure to something. Just owning a house gives you some liability. That's why when you have homeowners insurance, there's a line on there for personal injury. That's not personal injury for you. That's personal injury for the UPS delivery person, or the mail delivery, or the neighbors that come over to bring you a cake, and they slip on your sidewalk, or they trip on something that's out in the yard. That's to help cover them. Just by owning that property, we have some liability. Okay, so what is the definition of liability? It's really being responsible for something, and in this instance that we're talking about, it's by law. If we are found to be negligent, then we can have to pay for damages, whether they be physical damages to property or personal injury. And there's really an equation that has to take place before we can be found negligent there. There has to be a duty. We have to breach that duty, and injury has to occur. If all those are in place, then we can have a suit against us and potentially lose that suit and have to restore that person or property back to being whole. So ask yourself, what is a duty? And don't people have some responsibility in and of themselves? You know, we look at this picture, and this picture kind of looks like it might be staged, and it maybe is. It's my kids. We were out and about one day, and we came upon this old mine, and they had their explosives magazine. They'd left it wide open, and of course there was writing on there, explosives, danger, keep out, and so I posed my, well, of course the kids wanted to, hey, let's go in there. I posed my kids in front of this to take a picture there with their BB guns, and you know, what's the real duty that this owner of the mine? If my kids went in there and blew themselves up, which I didn't allow them to go in there, if they went in there and blew themselves up, would the owner of that mine potentially be liable for that? Even if we were trespassing, even if my kids went in there with all of the warnings and it said danger, is there potential? Well, yeah, there is potential that way. People do own their actions, but only to a limited extent. Now, a fully functioning adult has more comparative fault than somebody who's a child or somebody who is elderly and maybe not of a complete mental capacity. And so we have to look at that in different ways. Another thing we need to look at along these same grounds is a duty, is a legal obligation, something that we take upon ourselves that we have to meet a reasonable standard of care. Who do we owe that duty to? Well, people we invite. So in your facilities, if you invite somebody to come and use your playground, simply by putting a playground out there, we invite those people to come and participate in the activities around a playground or a park or whatever it is. Licensees, if we charge those people a fee to enter our facilities and use the equipment or services that we provide there, we owe them a greater duty than somebody who we've invited. Trespassers, we also owe them duty. My kids go into that mine and get blown up. Guess what? That the owner of that mine had a duty to secure that magazine for explosives, so those kids could go in there. And when we have an attractive nuisance, it might be a pile of concrete with rebar sticking out of it. It might be the gate on our public works shop is left open and kids come in there and start playing on our equipment. We incur some exposure and potential liability from those kids being able to get in there because of that attractive nuisance. All right, so how do we know what the standard of care is? And I don't know if any of you have been driving down the freeway and seen somebody with a mattress strapped to the top of their car. I thought this picture was kind of funny. Lance and I were driving along one day, and we saw something just like this, and the mattress was about folded in half, and the ropes were about to give away. And anyway, so we're trying to get the person's attention and let them know. The question is on this, what's the reasonable standard of care that is expected of somebody hauling a mattress? Well, the standard of care is it doesn't fall off. It doesn't cause people damage. If it does fall off of the car, we're going to be exposed there, and if somebody's injured or property damage takes place, we may have to restore them to whole. So what does that mean for all of our operations? Well, that means we need to look at our operations and say, what kind of exposures do we have here? Well, we have playgrounds, we have sewers, we have people driving around in cars, we have employees out working doing dangerous jobs. These are all exposures to our organization. Then as we look at those, we've got to say, what is the reasonable standard of care that we have to provide for each of those activities. And my recommendation is that we evaluate that and we write that down and say, here's where we have to be. Here's and we also communicate that with all of our employees and all of the people. This is what we have to do to stay safe and make sure that we're not exposed to lawsuits. So we write these things down. Now, what are these standards of care? Where do you find those? Well, they may be an ANSI standard. They may be an ASTM standard. They may be the traffic right-of-way laws. They may be something that's an unwritten standard that's out there that has grown over the years. You know, something similar to a sidewalk. As we have people trip and fall on uplifts in a sidewalk. Really, if we're over about 1/4 of an inch in uplift, that's a standard that's out there. It's going to be hard for us to defend if our uplift is greater than 1/4 of an inch. We haven't done a good job in identifying that hazard and abating it over time. So let's look at those standards and write those down and then communicate them so everybody knows. This is what's expected of us. If we don't do that, we'll probably lose if we ever get sued. So some of you out there are saying, but wait, you know, I'm a government entity. We have government immunity. You can't sue the government. And in theory, that's correct. You know, in state law, it says that you are free from suit unless we do something wrong, and that has even been eroded over time. As we look at what activities are defined as government activities, purely governmental, that has been narrowed down, and so many of our recreation type activities really fall outside of government. Now there may be some limits, statutory limits on the awards, but immunity may be eroded based on the type of activity that we're providing. Even things such as providing water, collecting sewer have been thrown out as, hey, this isn't a purely governmental function. So let's not rely on the governmental immunity to protect us in these cases. And in addition, if we have a condition that is unsafe, defective, or dangerous condition in a public improvement, that immunity is waived. If we have an employee who does something that is an omission or an act that they do, and somebody is injured from that, that governmental immunity is waived in that case as well. Okay, looks like we were having some issues with our audio, but I think it's back, I hope. I'm hoping it's coming back there. It may be...
This seems to be fine. Every now and then it cuts out, but then it does the little fast forward to catch you up.
Okay, we may be having a bandwidth issue. Maybe let me turn my webcam off and see if that will help things out, just in case. Okay, let me know if that changes. A couple of things. Some people say, well, you know what? This is just a dangerous activity that these people are doing. You know, they deserve what they get because they decided to go on a rodeo, or they decided to go skiing, or paragliding, or one of these dangerous things. And in truth, that's right. And in state code, we have some protection. Activities like rodeo, skateboarding, skydiving, paragliding, roller skating, all these things are defined as inherently risky activities, inherently dangerous. And so we get a little bit of protection there. And here's what it says. No person may make a claim or recover from any of the following entities for personal injury or property damage resulting from any of the inherent risks of participating in a recreational activity. And it's talking about counties, municipalities, and local districts. So the majority of our members fit into that category. So if we have one of these risky activities, take rodeo. We are protected under inherent risks. If somebody's out riding a bucking bronco and they fall off and break their neck, that is an inherently risky activity, to the point where we have a part in that. If somebody falls off and there's a bolt sticking out of a fence along the side of the arena, and they are impacted by that bolt, they get lacerated or have some other injury, because of that condition, we may incur some liability. The condition of our facilities in that case. Just, if somebody flies off of a horse and the horse kicks them while they're in midair, that's an inherently dangerous activity that they've taken on themselves. But when our facilities or our people interact with them, then we can still be exposed to liability. So how do we go about avoiding losses? And like I said, we're not avoiding lawsuits in most cases. Now, we can do some things that will minimize the chance that we will have a lawsuit, but like I said, there's no reason why people can still file a lawsuit even if they have no grounds. It may be thrown out, but it can still cost us a lot of money. So how do we avoid these things? Well, we want to be reasonable and prudent. What would a reasonable person find to be appropriate in this situation? And how do we prove that we've been reasonable and prudent? This picture, and I've used this one a lot because this is a perfect example of how we can easily have a serious accident and not even think about it. This is a harrow that's used in the infield of a baseball field to help prepare the field. It's a good thing. Helps us provide a good surface for people to recreate on. The problem comes is when we're done using this harrow, what do we do with it? In this situation, they tipped it up against a fence. And what that provides is a real hazard to anybody, really, but particularly young children who would use that as a ladder. Hey, I can see the game better if I climb up these steel spikes that are sticking out of the harrow, and then the harrow tips over and injures the child. We're wide open to a suit in that situation. How do we prove that we've been reasonable and prudent? Let's go through some examples here in a minute. Just a couple of things ahead of that. How do we avoid liability? Identify our exposures. Identify what the standard of care is for each of those exposures. There's going to be a control that we can put in place to control that exposure. Put that in place, and then verify it. We need to be out there, and you'll hear this tune a lot this year, where we talk about inspecting and auditing our facilities. So we've got to get out and look, and then document. Just on inspections, we'll keep talking about those a lot, and I'll give you this advice: that inspections don't happen from the truck. We've got to get out and physically look at the equipment, physically look at our facilities, and see. If we're just doing a drive-by, we're not going to see the simple things like this water structure here, stormwater inlet, where somebody had removed the grading. Somebody could fall in that, kids could climb into that, maybe be overcome by water or lack of oxygen in that space, and you're not going to see that from the truck. You've got to get out and walk over those facilities. So once again, documentation. If it isn't written down, it never happened unless it's bad. And so we need to document really everything that we do out there. So what do we document? Of course, training. That helps us to show that our employees, the people that are out doing the tasks, have the adequate knowledge and skills to be able to do what we're asking of them. Document incidents. Take the information. Even if it's something that probably isn't going to be a claim, let's get the information down. Now, there are a lot of cases where we may want to start a claim even if the person says, "Oh, it'll be okay," just because it has the potential of being a big claim, and we want to have that information down ahead of time so we can plan. We can do our diligence from the trust end and have our adjusters go out and gather that information and prepare a defense just in case that we need that. Response to complaints. We should have a list of all of the complaints that we have come in about our people, our facilities, our operations. Keep a list of that and what we did to respond to those complaints. That's a very important step in documenting that we're being reasonable and prudent. Yeah, we had an accident happen one day, but every other time, you can see on here, every time we've had a problem on our list, we take care of it, and we've been very, very proactive on that. Sometimes accidents happen. Maybe we weren't there in time. We have a better chance of defending ourselves in those cases. Any actions that we've taken, if we have teenagers out doing damage to our playground equipment or loitering on our facilities, getting in trouble, do we go and ask them to leave? Do we call the police to come in and ask them to leave? If so, that's a perfect piece of documentation to show that we have been reasonable and prudent in preventing people from doing dumb things, preventing people from getting where they're not supposed to get. I say police, it's great to bring the police in. It takes us out of potential conflict with people, and there's also always a document trail that goes along with that. If the police have a call, there's going to be a police report that happens on that. Other things is we inspect, and Doug did a presentation this morning, and he showed a bunch of checklists, and we have a lot of those for different parts of your operations. But let's go out and inspect these facilities, document that. A checklist is a really easy way to do it. But things like repairs. We found a problem with a piece of equipment. We found a trip hazard. We document that. We take action to repair that. Just put that down in a list so we can show, time and again, we've been reasonable and prudent. All right, I want to run through some examples on how we can limit our liability. And I thought we just take a few of the common exposures that we have out there and talk about best management practices that we can use to prevent those. So on workers' compensation, this is an exposure that pretty much all of us have, and pretty much all of us are potentially injured, whether it's a slip and fall or whatever it may be, a paper cut, all the way down to a fatal traffic accident. We're exposed to injury at our workplace. So what's the standard of care that we're looking at? Well, OSHA tells us that we need to provide a workplace free of recognizable hazards that could cause serious injury. A breach of that would produce an employee that's injured. They'd have to have medical care. Now, in this case, this is a statutory program that we don't have a great deal of control because the state legislature has said exactly how these cases are to be handled. But what can we do to handle our program and reduce our exposure? Well, a few things we need to have in place. One, a good safety program. And this webinar and a lot of our training, we focus on how do we put a good safety program in place to protect our employees. If we don't have a written program, if we don't have training, if we don't have a personal protective equipment program, then we're really exposing ourselves to this type of a loss. Some other things that we can do: have a good return to work program. This is the financial side of the loss. How do we get our people back to work if they're injured? We need to have a commitment to get them back as soon as we possibly can. And that will help us not only save a lot of money in the long run, but also help our employees get better faster and help them mentally and keep their morale up in the workplace. One really simple thing that you can do is direct care. So if somebody's injured and it's not a 911 call, I slice my finger or my wrist has really been hurting, so I need to get looked at. Let's direct that care to an industrial clinic that is a preferred provider, one of our network providers. That's a way that we can make sure we have a doctor that knows about workers' compensation, knows how to get people back to work, minimize the impact on our operations. And so really encourage you to take that opportunity. Most states, or many states, you cannot direct care, but in Utah we have that great opportunity there to get ahead of a claim like this that could be messed up simply by a doctor that doesn't know how to deal with workers' compensation. The next one, auto liability. This is a huge exposure that each of us have. What's the standard of care? Well, it really comes down to the traffic laws. We need to stay in our own lanes. We need to obey the right-of-way rules. And if we impact somebody else, there's a good potential that it's going to be our fault. and incur some liability. This is generally our largest loss, and a lot of the losses that we have here at the trust are preventable. Really, the majority are easily preventable by doing some simple things. Here's some best management practices for that. One, have a good driver qualification program, a policy and procedure that we just don't let anybody drive. We look at your record, and if you don't have a good driving record, we're either going to train you, coach you, or maybe your job shouldn't be one that you drive on. That's a responsibility we should take as an employer to make sure those employees are adequately prepared to be able to do that task, and if they're not, we can ask them to do a different task. Set driver standards and rules and stick by those and supervise those rules. Something as simple as wearing safety belts. But get out there and watch our employees, what they're doing, train them on the appropriate techniques, and then supervise. See what they're doing. A simple talk by a supervisor. Hey, I noticed that you were doing this when you were out there driving. You know, could we do this? You know, here's a technique that can help prevent you from having a backing accident. Whatever it may be, that simple act of having a supervisor coach somebody in their driving lets them know, hey, the employer's concerned about this, and oh, my job might be on the line if I don't drive safely. My job might be on the line if I don't keep a good driving record, because they're going to be checking my motor vehicle records. And just a little plug for a program that we have here. It is a free program. We will check your motor vehicle records initially, and then every month. All you have to do is give us your employees' names, driver's license number, and their date of birth, and we will put that into our system, and you'll get a monthly report. This has been an extremely successful program in its inaugural year. We're just about a year into it, and we have seen a dramatic reduction in the number of violations on people. A lot of people that had denied or expired licenses get those back to where they're fully legal and in good shape. We've seen a few people that had really bad driving records that are no longer in jobs where they have to drive. So these are positive things that reduces the exposure not only for the organizations where those drivers are, but for the entire pool as a whole. Sewer, another big exposure that we have. So if you're in the sewer business, the standard of care is that the stuff should go down the drain and not up. We also have a new standard that's out there, and that's the sanitary sewer management plan that has been imposed as a legal requirement. And so, if you haven't looked into that, if you're not implementing that, you need to know that that's really the standard of the industry now, and that's what you're going to be judged against. So if we breach that duty, then the stuff that's supposed to go down the drain comes up the drain and impacts people's basements. A few best management practices that we recommend. Number one is inspection. Get an eyeball into every one of those manholes each year, so you know what's going on with your sewer system. Have a working intimate knowledge of where your trouble spots are, and devote your resources to those areas. Going back to the standard of care, in reality, if you have a sewer backup and that area of the line has not been inspected and cleaned within the last year, you're probably going to end up owning liability on that. So we've got to know what's going on in our system. We've got to have an active cleaning and maintenance program to make sure those systems are in tip-top shape. And in many cases, if we've done our due diligence there, we can avoid liability in the event that somebody, flushes a diaper down or something gets caught, and we do have a backup. There are cases that we've been able to limit our liability. Once again, documentation is critical on this to show that we have been reasonable and prudent in doing that. Sidewalks. This is kind of a tricky one right now. Standard of care, like I said, greater than 1/4 inch is kind of a standard that's out there, But in the past, we've been able to defend many of these claims as long as we had a good program in place where we were going out and inspecting, prioritizing which one of these problems with the sidewalk, and it could be an uplift or a separation or a lot of different cracks or other hazards that are out there. As long as we had a good program to inspect, prioritize, and we were putting a reasonable amount of our budget towards that, and getting through our sidewalks on a regular basis, we're able to defend many of these claims. There was just a recent court case involving Salt Lake City, and that has kind of eroded away that. Salt Lake had done a good job. They'd really done what we talked about here, done their due diligence. Somebody tripped. They'd identified a trip hazard, negotiated with the property owner there to repair that, cut a check to pay for the damage or pay for the repairs, and sometime in between that check being cut, somebody tripped, and in this case they ended up losing. So we're still the jury's still out to say on what that's going to mean to all of our operations and our sidewalks around the state. But it definitely means that we've got to be on the top of our game, knowing what all of those uplifts are, where those trip hazards are, and definitely taking care of the big exposures right away. We've got to look at our budgets and make sure they're adequate for what we have out there. If we're spending $1,000 a year on sidewalks out of a multi-million-dollar budget, we're going to lose. We need to have a reasonable amount dedicated to that, and be able to get through our sidewalks in a reasonable amount of time. Open spaces. A lot of us have trails and parks and open spaces out there that may have hazards. Maybe a water course, or maybe who knows what the hazards are there. The reasonable standard of care is there shouldn't be a hole out in the middle of the soccer field that we could trip in or drop a leg down in and be injured. A breach of this standard of care would be somebody having an injury. So best management practices for these open spaces: inspection. Get out and look. Like we said, get out of the truck, document these inspections, and then take action. We can't let those findings, if we identify something, we can't sit on that and allow it to be out there for somebody to get hurt. That could actually cause us more harm than potentially not seeing it. Documenting what we've done when we find these things. So we look on this picture here. You know, we've got a hole in our fence. That brings us to a topic of if you build it, you own the liability for it. So if we decide to go out and put a fence up, there's a canal or there's a cliff or something out there that's a potential hazard, it's a good thing to go and put a fence up, but we own that fence from now on. And there are many cases when a natural state may put us at less liability than us going out and putting a fence up and not maintaining it. So the question is, defense or not defense, and each situation is going to vary. Here's an interesting picture I found. So do we fence? That's a good question, and each situation is going to be different on that. There are cases when you're better off not to fence a given area. How about signage? Do we go and post about these hazards? Well, if there's a hidden hazard, it's incumbent upon us. So say there's a ditch running through one of our parks, just a small meandering canal, but there's a hazard in there, maybe a diversion, a water diversion that swirls and could cause people to drown. Those type of situations, we have a duty to warn of those hidden hazards. However, we have to be really careful about just going out and throwing signs up willy-nilly. We need to have a sign inventory where we track those things, and we have a good reason to put that sign up, because if we don't maintain it, we put a sign up there and it got vandalized or damaged or lost, or trees grew up around it, and people didn't have a reasonable ability to see that sign, that could increase our exposure. All right. Well, in summary, just some simple things, and they're the standard things that we talk about a lot. Identify what our exposures are. If we don't identify those exposures, they're still out there. There's still things that could potentially cause us grief and pain. So get out there and look, write those things down. Here's what we have, here's the exposure, and here's what we're going to do to meet the applicable standard of care that's required for that. And then we're going to go out and audit. We're going to inspect, we're going to look at our facilities and document what we do. All right, Doug, I think that's about everything I had. Can you believe that? I actually got done early.
That's amazing, Jason. That's absolutely amazing.
I don't think that's happened before.
There was one comment or question about how time-consuming the inspection process would be versus, is there any kind of as you go through this process over time, is it something that maybe becomes less time-consuming? Are there things that we do that can kind of streamline this or make it easier as we go along?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe you have some thoughts on that, Doug.
Well, my comment was, preparing a good, audit form or inspection list for your various facilities, up front, of course, is going to take some time, and it's going to be somewhat time consuming to do that. But if you have a good program, a good outline that your employees can follow to do these audits and inspections, then that, of course, becomes more efficient in the long run. It also allows you to share the responsibility and train more employees to be able to do these audits or inspections for you when you have developed a standardized inspection form that's specific to your organization and your facilities. So you're not locked into maybe one person always going around and taking a look at these things. Also gives you the advantage of having more of your employees familiar with the types of issues that we're looking for when they've had a chance to participate in these audits and inspections.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not intended that these inspections would really demand a ton of time. Now, like Doug did his webinar today on spring safety startup, when we go out in the springtime after cold and frost, and we look at a playground, for instance, it's going to take a lot more time on that initial audit that we're going to look at that and make sure everything's still in place. Beyond that, during the summer, it could be the people that are mowing the lawns get a checklist, and they go out and document the quick inspection. So, a playground inspection would probably take definitely less than 15 minutes, unless it's a really involved large playground. Same thing goes for our facilities. A monthly inspection would be definitely less than a half hour to walk through our shops, unless they're really extensive. So we don't intend these to be a big burden, and more than anything, it helps people, like Doug said, so everybody understands what the risks are out there, and over time, they're going to take a lot less time because we get a lot better at doing those. So, looks like we've got a question. Can we get a copy of this PowerPoint? Yes, I will. I'll send out a copy of this afternoon, and this recording of the webinar will be placed on our website as well. I think we've had some people ask for the checklists as well. So we'll throw some checklists together and send that out on email to everybody that signed up for the webinar. Any other questions, Doug?
Not that I see.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody taking some time to sign up for this webinar today. And I appreciate all the efforts that you have out there. If you have any questions, please talk to Doug, Lance, or myself, and we will be happy to help wherever we can. And we look forward to getting out on the road here in the next couple of weeks and spending some time with you and seeing what we can do to help for the next year to build our programs together. Thanks a lot. Everybody go out and have a safe day.
And there they go.
And there they go. There, we can stop the recording.